Ooh. Uh-oh. Ta-da! Hello and welcome to this tutorial on my advanced coloring technique using Blick Studio Alcohol Markers. This week, we will be building on the basic coloring technique as it applies to matte and gloss surfaces while adding more colors to our color transitions, using grayscale to desaturate colors and touching on rim lighting. In the basic coloring tutorial, we learned that by using 3 colors along with black and white, we could render a circle into a fairly realistic sphere. Stepping into advanced coloring, our first practice sphere will be created with 3 colors along with black for the shadow and another color for reflected light. I have chosen lilac for this example because it is complementary to the yellow of the sphere and also has lower saturation, making it a sort of violet-gray color. I begin by blocking in the base layer and outlining the highlight with canary yellow, which is our lightest yellow in this example. Next, I outline the darker edges of the sphere and block in the medium shadow area with yellow ochre. Switching back to canary yellow, I start by coloring within the yellow ochre area and work gradually toward the highlight, but stopping short of arriving all the way there. This allows the canary yellow marker to pick up yellow ochre pigment and carry it into the lighter area with decreasing intensity as the pigment is used up. Switching back to the yellow ochre, I darken the shadow area a bit without coloring all the way to the previous edge. If we really wanted to make a perfectly smooth gradient, we could repeat the step of blending with canary yellow and stopping just short of the area from our second pass, darkening the yellow ochre area again, and so on. In this case, however, I will continue on by blocking in the darkest shadow areas with light umber, and then perform a blending pass with the canary yellow. Now I am ready to add black to the sphere. Black is used very sparingly, literally drawing a thin line at the absolute darkest area of the sphere and adding a couple of short lines along the back edge. Returning to the light umber, I blend the black into the darkest shadow area while leaving a fairly large light section behind the penumbra, as I am treating this sphere like a somewhat reflective surface. The last marker I am adding to this example is lilac, and I am using it to blend, color, and desaturate the entire shadow area of the sphere behind the penumbra. This area is reflected light, and its color will be determined by the color of the light or surface being reflected. Since I am just making it up in this example, I chose a color that is a dull complement to the yellow coloring of the sphere. Note that anything being reflected on the backside should be less bright than the highlight and main area of the light side. To finish off this example, I add a cast shadow from the sphere onto the ground plane with light umber, blend the edges out with yellow ochre, and lay in the darkest part of the cast shadow with black. Light umber is used again to blend and soften the black into the light umber area. Looking at the example once it has had time to dry, we can see that the shading works even though it could be smoother, and the reflected light section on the backside of the sphere's penumbra is slightly purple-gray. Overall, the sphere feels like it has volume and exists in 3-dimensional space, but we are going to discuss adding even more realism throughout this tutorial. I am pretty sure I meant to demonstrate and discuss the use of grays for desaturation and shading before coloring this blue sphere. But instead, I just colored it in without using any of the grays. Not to worry though, I'm going to use this as a visual comparison to doing it the right way when I get to the red sphere. In this example, I first fill in the color bubbles with orange, red, wine, basic gray 1, 3, and 5, and black. Jumping right in with the black, I draw the shadow penumbra on the sphere, darken the back edge, and lay in the core of the cast shadow on the ground plane. Basic Gray 5 is used to add dark values that touch the black lines and depict the short lightening shadow value along the edge of the sphere towards the highlight area. I also add some value to expand the cast shadow from the core outward. Basic Gray 3 adds the medium dark values above and below the penumbra, along with the outer edges of the sphere nearing the highlight side. The cast shadow gets just a little larger, working a bit further from its core. Basic Gray 1 is used for the lightest shadow values and completes the outer edge of the sphere at the top left side. The cast shadow reaches its maximum working outward from the core. Moving on to the wine marker, I add most of the sphere outline and color in the dark areas that were blocked in with black, Basic Gray 5, and some of Basic Gray 3. The red marker is used to cover everything that was blocked in with the grays and spreads a little into the white area of the sphere. The orange marker is used to color in the remaining white area, except for a circular highlight in the top left area of the sphere. I try some cross-hatching with the red and blending with the orange to see how smooth of a gradient I can get this way. The results are okay, but not ideal. I do the same with wine and blend with red, which yields slightly better results, so I try another pass of really short red hatching and blending with orange. I add colors to the cast shadow, working from the light outside to the dark core, and then come back in with black to sharpen the penumbra of the sphere and the core of the cast shadow. I finish the sphere off with one more pass of wine to soften the transition between the black and the wine. Placing the two examples side by side, we can make a judgment call on whether or not we prefer to use the grayscale before coloring. The colors in the immediate vicinity of our grayscale usage are less vibrant and have blended a bit smoother than the colors farther away from the grayscale, and those unadulterated colors are for the most part a bit too vibrant. Both spheres look pretty good, but the red is slightly better, and using a more comprehensive grayscale before coloring may have had a significantly larger impact on the difference between these two spheres. In this example, I am exploring the theory that more grayscale will result in a better matte sphere. This time around, I am also coloring the background area of the example. The image is being shaded with cool grays 30, 50, and 70%, along with black. I leave an area of the sphere untouched by the cool grays, though this area will be colored as the sphere will be matte without a bright highlight. The grayscale here is pretty rough, even though I have done a couple of passes to give it some level of gradation. We will be catching some rim lighting or backlighting on the bottom right edge of the sphere, so that area has been left pretty light at this point. The colors in the background are brick red and red. The brick red over the dark grayscale area gives a nice level of contrast along the horizon line of the image, while the red marker blends the dark red a little bit and colors the remainder of the background. The ground plane is cerulean blue and is just laid down like flat coloring over the cast shadow from the sphere. I used the chisel tip for some of this, but that is just a personal choice and has little difference in effect. The sphere is canary yellow, yellow ochre, and sienna, with reflected light of dark green and spring green. Coloring the sphere, I start with the canary yellow, coloring all of the brightest areas and crossing over some of the light gray undertones. Yellow ochre is next, starting where the canary yellow stopped and covering everything except the very back edge of the sphere. Remember, we're going to have reflected light back there, and we don't want to add colors that will contaminate or dull the effect before we get to it. Sienna comes in for the darkest color areas of the sphere and covers the established black line as well. Switching back to yellow ochre, I begin the process of blending to create a gradient between the two colors. Canary yellow is brought back to soften the transition between itself and the yellow ochre, and then I perform one more blending pass, working through sienna, yellow ochre, and canary yellow. The rim lighting on this sphere is green, and I use spring green to lay in the base color before shading and blending the transition from sienna to green near the sphere's penumbra with the dark green marker. I switch back to spring green again for one more pass between the dark green and the main area of reflected light, but making sure to leave a thin line of that original spring green pass showing along the edge. Very quickly, I color in the cast shadow from the sphere with sienna and blend it with the cool gray 50%. The final result of this coloring process is a painterly looking sphere, which is made slightly more interesting by the green rim lighting along its dark edge. As before, the color transitions could be made smoother through additional blending steps. Furthermore, the additional grayscale used in the initial steps of coloring the sphere have caused the colors to become less saturated everywhere except in the main highlight and the small section of rim lighting that were not colored with gray at all. The act of using the grayscale before adding color performs two key functions in realistic coloring. First, it creates a base or guide of value, shifting from brightest white to darkest black for us to follow when we switch to color. And second, the grayscale desaturates colors which are applied over it. That subtle change in color saturation can often be the key to advancing beyond cartoonish color into far more realistic coloring. This example is very similar to the last, but this time we will be making the sphere a lot more glossy or reflective. With pencil, I have lightly drawn in the reflective penumbra of the sphere along with 3 highlight areas and a loosely shaped cast shadow on the ground plane. The central circular highlight is the true highlight of the sphere, where the light is hitting directly and will be the brightest point of the sphere. The 2 teardrop-shaped highlights will be secondary, and they are picked up along the curving surface of the sphere. The strange cutout shape of the penumbra on this sphere is my own stylization of the rim lighting and acts sort of like an opposing highlight, though it will not be anywhere near as bright as the main highlight, nor will it be white at all. I begin with the grayscale in the background, using cool gray 70%, 50%, and 30% to create a gradient scale from the horizon line and lightening as we near the top of the image. The ground plane is flatly toned with the cool gray 30%. Using black, I fill in the penumbra shape on the sphere and color along the dark edge into the core of the cast shadow. This time around, I color the background with brick red, red, and orange, striving to create the blend from darkest brick red at the horizon line to a red-orange at the top of the image. Again, the ground plane is flatly colored with cerulean blue, though I add a second pass along the horizon line and immediately around the sphere. Trying something a little different this time, I switch to the sienna for the darkest brown of the gold sphere and create a thin shadow area along the edges of the black penumbra. Switching to yellow ochre, I add a slightly thicker area along the sienna above the penumbra and then make a pass of blending strokes from the sienna into the yellow ochre. I introduce the cool gray 70% over the top of the sienna colored areas and then switch back to yellow ochre to blend this dark brown outward into the pure yellow ochre area. My goal here is to create as much blend as I am able, rather than blocking in large color shapes with hard transitions. Again, I use sienna at the edge of the black penumbra to intensify the dark brown, and then spread it with the yellow ochre. At this point, the gradated color change is beginning to take shape and looks promising. Canary yellow is finally introduced, creating a thin to medium section of color along the yellow ochre and touching the outermost edges of the highlights. This next pass of the yellow ochre should not have come into contact with the canary yellow. The intention was to deepen the darkest portions of the yellow ochre area and then blend with the canary yellow. My mistake causes the transition from yellow ochre to canary yellow to remain more stark than intended. I continue with the canary yellow, filling in the rest of the light area after outlining the highlight areas. Yellow ochre is used to create hatch marks moving from the yellow ochre area into the canary yellow area, and then canary yellow is hatched from its area into the yellow ochre shadow. Sienna is brought in again to darken along the edge of the black penumbra and blended once more with the yellow ochre in short feathery strokes before being blended itself with the canary yellow. Moving to the dark side of the black penumbra, I apply a layer of spring green to the entire area. Dark green is used sparingly to create the transition from black into the spring green, and then the spring green is again used to blend the dark green while leaving the edges and core of the reflected bulb light. Cool gray 70% comes in again along the edge of black and dark green to desaturate the colors. The cast shadow of the sphere is blocked in with sienna, darkened and dulled everywhere except the edge with cool gray 70%. Using black, I fill in the core of the shadow and then blend outward with the cool gray 70%. Switching to the cerulean blue of the ground, I color the outer edges of the shadow inward, deepening the color of the ground plane in and around the shadow area, before applying another coating to the entire ground plane. Looking over the completed glossy sphere, we can see that the color transitions have been improved upon over the matte sphere, and that the full grayscale may not be necessary, as we only added touches of gray, which were then scattered throughout the sphere during color blending. The advanced coloring method is a lot more time-consuming than basic coloring, but the results are worthwhile if we prefer a painterly look to our coloring as opposed to the cartoon-like appearance of less complicated methods. We will wrap up this video with some additional notes on skin. First, skin is a surface that is fairly matte in an idle state, but becomes more glossy when wet from water, sweat, or some other fluid. In natural lighting, which is composed of fire, whether from the sun or a much more local fire, such as a torch or burning building, skin tones tend to shift toward yellow-white in the lighter areas and blue in the darker areas. If you manage to achieve the appropriate values in your coloring, you can get away with using somewhat strange color choices for skin tones. On the other hand, inappropriate values and highly saturated colors will be immediately noticed by everyone. The lightest and darkest skin tones will look dead and ugly if we limit ourselves to the use of white, peach, brown, and black. Finding good areas in the value shift for red, yellow, blue, violet, and even green can create lively, vibrant skin tones that people will find interesting to look at. The skin tones on this card were colored on the shiny side of poster board, and I would not recommend using it with alcohol markers, as the results I had were both messy and unreliable. Next week, I will be demonstrating everything from this tutorial on another coloring page from my fantasy coloring book. If you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful, please let me know in the comments section. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Those little things mean a lot to YouTube, and they make me happy too. My Patreon patrons help to supply the tools for my art and video making habits, and I really appreciate their support. If you are interested in keeping up with my latest art pieces, full-size high-resolution image downloads, the PDF of my fantasy coloring book, and more exclusive benefits, join me on Patreon at patreon.com/EricPerkinsArtist. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you will join me next week for the coloring demonstration.